Record. Okay. You can hear me, I assume. Seems to be recording. All right. So where were we? We were Christmas, weren't we? Okay, we talked about reset defaults. We've seen spatial color curves. I'd forgotten we also added it to the single strand effect. It does the same thing that it does for everything else. Single strand. There's single strand. So let's put some color back in it. Get rid of that. And you can see, so it just moves it across. So you can use that for arches and the like, I guess, using spatial color curves if that's what you want to do. Home, start of song, end of song, and pause key. So what this does is when you're playing, if you've got a Windows machine and you have a pause key on your keyboard, you can press the pause key and it will pause playing of the song. If you have a home key, it will jump to the beginning of the song. If you have an end key, it will jump to the end of the song. So just some quick navigation keys for getting around the player. Manual subbuffer editing and additional subbuffer settings. So you've seen me over here click and drag on this thing to move things around. I'm not sure if you knew it, but if you double click on it, it resets it. You can also right click on it. Full buffer will reset it as well, but there are also some predefined top half, bottom half, left half, right half. There's also thirds, which are horizontal thirds. I probably need to add vertical thirds, but there's horizontal thirds. So if you've got 3 singing faces or something, maybe that's what you want to do with it and break it up. There's also quarters, which let you quarter the particular model and quickly create a subbuffer that's set up that way. There's also an oversize. And it looks like the yellow boxes has gone away, but what's happened is the yellow box has actually been dragged way out bigger than you can even see. And that has an interesting effect because what it does is it effectively makes the buffer that we render on substantially larger than the model. So let's just reset it here and let's go and delete some of this crap. And let's go and grab a butterfly because everyone knows the butterfly. Right, that's how the butterfly looks. But look what happens when we set it to oversize. Effectively, what you're seeing is a zoomed in view of the butterfly because the butterfly is now rendering on something that's actually 9 times the size of the model, and we're seeing just the middle 1/9 of the model. And that can be useful in some circumstances with some effects, particularly if you want to have some things move in and out of shot and the settings that we give you don't really allow you to do that. You can now think, you can conceptually be rendering something up here in the bottom, top right here, and then bring it into view and then bring it out of view. So yeah. You can also manually edit the settings, and here you get to see what the actual settings of the buffer are. So in this case, it's set to 200. If that was 100, it would be set to the top, as you would expect. So this can also let you get some really precise manual control over exactly where the buffer goes. Conceptually, I think the bottom left is 0, 0, the top right is 100, 100, and so anything negative is off to the left of the model or off to the bottom of the model, and anything greater than 100 is up here. We don't let you go more than 9 times the size of the model. There is a price that you pay for going beyond the model, and that is that obviously the number of pixels that we have to render goes up significantly. It doesn't actually change the size of your FSCQ file, but it does change the amount of work that we have to do when we render. So it can slow things down a little bit. To be honest, it does a similar thing when you do a group. When you do a group, let's say I was to group together the matrix and the tree here, conceptually what it does is overlays a grid sitting across both of those models. And when you define a grid, when you define a model, it's actually this maximum grid size here that specifies how large that grid can be. And so conceptually it overlays, in this case, an up to a 400 by 400 size grid across the top of those models. It's a similar concept. We've talked about that. Sequence packaging. So sequence packaging, if you want to share a sequence with someone, the new way to do it is, rather than going in and hunting around for the files inside your show folder and putting them all into a zip file and hoping you got them all right, and then when they get to the other end, the person trying to piece it all back together because all of the references are now wrong and the audio file doesn't work, you can now come up to here and say, I want to package this sequence. In this case, it's telling me I haven't saved any changes, and so maybe that's a problem, and it almost certainly is. And then I can go and create a zip file. And what it will do, and let me show you one that I was working on earlier. What it does is it will go and create a zip file here. And so it will put everything into a folder inside the zip file. That folder will be the same name as your show folder. And that's really important, because by making that folder the same name as your show folder, all of the auto file path correction features of xLIghts, when it loads something from a machine which wasn't the original machine it was created on, will work, and it will correct all of the file paths. It also includes the necessary RGB effects file. It would include the networks file if it exists. It includes the show folder. In this case, I had an ISCQ file, so it includes the ISCQ file. If there are pictures or videos or any other Gladiator files that were referenced, all of them will be bundled up inside the zip file. All of the XML files will be modified so they point to the correct location of all of those files, so that when the file gets to the other end, it's really just a matter of extracting that folder, making that folder your show folder, loading the sequence up, doing a render all and saving it. And at that point, that person's show is now on your machine and ready to be safely imported into your sequence. For any of you who have done some importing of Lilia's sequences or Logan's sequences, and you face some of the challenges of getting all of those image files and everything to be exactly right, packaging sequence this way makes that whole process infinitely easier to do. Okay. I'd forgotten that Gil had added spatial color curves to Shockwave. So you can use things like the radial curves on the Shockwave. I'm not going to go into there. Same with the fan. The Galaxy. So there's a couple of changes that Gil made to the Galaxy effect. Some which are obvious and some which aren't. So he did some things to speed it up. But if you, hang on, if I make the end radius large, oh no, that's not what I wanted. If I make the width large, I think, is that it? Was it the radius or the width? Yeah. There was a width which rounds off the front of the Galaxy effect, but it only works, I think, when it doesn't overlap, and then it has problems. But it makes it look a little bit more natural than it previously did. And he's also fixed it so that you don't get gaps when you put it on really large models like your entire house or something. Cleaned a number of those sorts of things up. The Shockwave, so the Shockwave with the radial color curves. So you can see that now you've got a Shockwave that, I should get rid of that, hang on. So now you can see how that radial color curve has been applied. And that's what happens when you apply it around it. So it can create some quite interesting effects that previously were not achievable. Maybe I should get rid of that. There we go. So now you've got a shockwave, which can actually be a different color as it goes around. So that's those ones. Backing up subdirectories. So this is an option. I don't think it's enabled by default. But if you're a person that installs or saves your show files, your XML files, in a folder under your show folder, so not in your show folder, but in a subdirectory under your show folder, the default backup mode actually doesn't back those up. So now we've added the backup subfolders option. And what that will do is it will walk all of the subfolders under your show folder and make sure that it backs up all the XML files there. It will do every folder except the backup folder, because backing up backups doesn't make a lot of sense. It becomes a bit of a, a multiplying problem. But that will guarantee that you get backup. So you should turn that on if you are saving your stuff in different folders. It's minor. Okay, that one has no impact. There's xSchedule. We'll come back to that next week, maybe. DMX selection model. So this was just a simple change that Gil made to make it easier to select the DMX effect. It used to be really hard to select DMX effects, and he's made that a lot easier. Where am I? There it is. Add a sequence option, blending. Oh, okay. So so now we come to a couple of big ones. So first of all is groups in groups. So you can now create a hierarchy of groups. So here we have the all group. It contains the DMX group and it contains the pixels group. And then within those, you can see the models that sit in those underlying groups. Not only that, but Dan has also, again, let's delete everything. Do I have, oh, where's my models? Okay, so he's also added some additional modes. So here's our all with, and this is with the butterfly applied across the whole thing. He's added some additional modes here. Sorry, it's render styles. So per model, so he's added a whole bunch of additional models here. So this is, ooh, that's not good. I'll have to look at that one. We're now starting to get into new features. They're less likely to be stable. All right. So yeah, Dan's added some additional render styles when you've got a group like this and you're applying things. I can't remember which ones he actually added. I'd have to go back and check the check-in. But there are some additional models that previously weren't available here, which you can play with. What you can also do is you can blend across groups. So here we've got a butterfly. The butterfly is on everything on the whole house. And let's say I want to put the fire effect on my matrix. Well, there's the fire effect on my matrix. Now, historically, what would have happened is that we would have just seen the fire and it would have blanked out the all behind the house. But now it doesn't. Now what it does is it allows the data to be blended across the two. And now I have to go in and say effect 1 to force it not to do the blending. And the reason that happens is obviously the matrix and this group have overlapping channels. And so whereas previously you could only blend across layers, now you can blend between models using all the same blending effects up here. The thing you've got to remember though is whereas layers were rendering from bottom to top, and therefore layer 1 was the top, and then, sorry, effect 1 was the top effect and effect 2 was the bottom effect when you were looking at how the blending was applied. Because models are rendered from top to bottom, effect 1 is the bottom effect and effect 2 is the one above it that happens to be rendering onto the same channels. So it's just one of those things that you're going to kind of have to get your head around, because that's how it applies itself. Hopefully I explained that okay. By default, you'll probably find that model blending is not turned on. You may need to come up, where is it? Was there I thought it was a model blending. Or maybe I was wrong. I thought there was something which lets you turn it off, because obviously if you're running old sequences, you don't want it to. Here it is. Here it is here on the sequence settings. So here, because I created a new sequence, by default it turns on allow blending between models. If you load one of your old sequences, this will by default be turned off. And because it's turned off, you won't get any of that blending across the models. If you want to introduce it, you obviously have to turn it on, and you can, but you need to be aware that it's then going to allow every model to blend. And so you'll have to go through your whole sequence and make sure that you're either happy with how that blending looks, or you'll have to go up here and play with the blending mode to get it back to how exactly you wanted it to look. And so, you know, in the spirit of not breaking existing people's sequences, Dan's made that optional and turned it off, just as Chris ended up making the pinwheel new render mode an option rather than the default, because although his render mode I think is much better, if someone had built a sequence based on the previous behavior and needed it to work that way, and in this case someone did, we had to go back and reintroduce the old way of working. All right, so that's blending effects between models and groups, and support for groups within groups. I've got to say, support for groups within groups, look, I think there are still a few bugs floating out there. I must admit, I haven't really looked at how groups within groups work on the test tab. That may cause problems there as well. But we, yeah, it's a really cool feature. It's something we've been missing, and it's now there. Okay, we've talked about controlling which output IP address stuff goes from. Mapping extensions, if you're doing imports, I don't know, I'll pick one. You used to do a save mapping here, and it used to be that the file names had no extension. Now I've defined them with an XMap extension, which will make them easier to locate in your folder, because it will obviously filter down. If you still need to get to your old ones, you can select the all files, and you can still find your old mapping file. But I suggest you save it with the XMap extension, because it'll make it a lot easier to find those files when you're doing imports in the future. Vixen 2 and LOR import. So I made look, it's a small change on the import for both Vixen and LOR. So I'll do the LOR import, because I do have one of these floating around somewhere here, I thought. Okay, that'll do. So historically you had to go and manually add your models in. This is now more like the xLIghts import, where all your models are added by default, but they're now collapsed in a tree structure. And so when it comes time to do the import, you just expand the one that you're interested in, and you pick the channel that you want to map. You can map at any level. That all works. You can set the mapping color just like you always could. to do the import. So look, it's only a small change, but it does save you adding everything. And as you move between models, you can expand things back up, whereas the previous one left them all fully expanded, and you would spend your entire life scrolling up and down trying to find things. I'm sure it wasn't quite as bad as the xLIghts one. The xLIghts one was absolutely awful. But I've made a similar change to both this one and the Vixen import. I did remove the checkbox for the CCR import here. I must admit I'm a little unsure about whether that was a good idea or not, and I'm really waiting for feedback from LOR users to tell me whether that made sense or not. But that's the way it is right now. It's one of those double negative dialog boxes. Okay, bunch of things for the scheduler, a bunch of bugs, more scheduler. We talked about the list of reference files when you export effects. We talked about VSA files. I just didn't have one that imported correctly. I'm not sure why. The servo effect, yes. So the servo effect, which is this one here, is the effect that you actually use for your faces. So this is what you use for your Skulltronics, and it lets you control 16-bit values as opposed to 32-bit values, which the DMX effect controls. But like I said, I'll let Gil, he'll do much better justice to those videos than I ever will. And we looked at that. We looked, oh, yes, the old scheduler's gone. Notice there is no scheduler up here anymore. There's no playlist menu item. It's all gone. Video effect. Allow the video effect to automatically synchronize. Okay, so let's go and create a new sequence, but this time let's base it off a video file, which I have in here. Okay, there's one at the top. Done. Okay, so we've got an OLAF video, and if I want to come down and drop a video effect on my matrix, and let's imagine for the moment that I only want to show this much of the video from the song. So I cut the video in and out according to what part of the song it is. Historically, what I would need to do is I need to come down here and I need to select the video file, and then I'd have to go and play with the start time and try and match it all up with the audio. But given that this is actually a video file itself, and this is a video file, now all I need to do is click this checkbox, and it will automatically line the video up with the video in the audio. And so it'll automatically synchronize, and you don't have to set any of these other settings to make that happen. Much, much easier if you want to cut in and out of the video when you're sequencing a song like that. Okay, we showed that one. Fix effect background, so they default to first color or gradient instead of black. What Gil means by that is that some of the effects like galaxy and the like, notice how they fill in the color, which generally represents the color that the galaxy is going to be. Or it used to be that if you came in here and you put in a color curve, it would not display this correctly. It would just display black instead of the color. And so Gil's cleaned it up so that you get a proper display of the color. Okay, so here are the additional render styles that Dan added. So per model render buffer styles and model group render buffer styles. Oh, it's actually the render buffer styles. Yeah, that's right. So that's, we were talking about that a little while ago, right? So that's here where he's added these per model, per preview, and per model default, and per model single line, which are just slightly different ways in which they represent or create the buffer on which we then do the rendering of the effects. I must admit, I'm not entirely sure what the difference between each one is. we probably need to get a description into the manual, which I know the guys are busy working on. All right, last one, only a couple of enhancements. The last release was heavily focused on some bug fixes. And this one here was just a small change to the scheduler, and this one here was some Arduino code that I posted into the repository, and I posted a video on that last week. So pretty much that's all of the enhancements bar the FPP uploads and the Falcon uploads and the scheduler, which we can deal with next week. So we probably have a few minutes. If there's any questions people want to ask, I'd be more than willing to take them now or take them later. Up to you guys. There is an issue there. It includes the drive letter. That can cause issues. You'll have to explain that one to me.
Yeah, sure, Keith. What it is when you bundle up your sequences for other people to use.
Yep.
Because I use 3 different computers to actually do my sequencing, I've actually created a drive letter called Z that's shared on my network for the 2 main PCs at home.
Yep.
And I also use my USB stick as Z drive.
Yep.
Because it includes that drive letter, when you actually export it for someone else to use, I actually sent it off to one guy in the US to play around with one of my sequences. He couldn't, well, he had some trouble.
Yeah,
because it actually included the drive letter.
So, yeah, but actually it won't. And the reason it won't is because I include the show folder inside the zip file. And as long as you take that show folder and you don't change its name, and the other person sets that show folder to be the name, what xLIghts does when it loads is it looks for the resources, and when it realizes it can't find the resources, it looks at that machine's show folder and basically strips the front of that away and replaces it with their machine's path. So in theory, it should actually automatically fix itself. And if you're doing what you're doing across multiple computers, because I do this all the time, right? I run on this machine, it's on my C drive, on my machine upstairs, it's on a D drive. And I never actually change anything. I actually check it in the GitHub between each machine. And I never actually fix any paths up. It just fixes automatically when I load the sequence.
Oh, okay. That's excellent.
Right, but what you end up, if you look in the file, you'll find that it's a real basket case of paths, but as long as that show folder is in the path, xLIghts should sort itself out.
Very good, okay. Thank you.
And the other thing it does when it packages a sequence, if you refer to, I don't know, a picture file on your F drive or something, what it will actually do is it will grab that picture file, it will copy it into a folder called lost, and it will edit your sequence file and repoint it to the lost folder. So even files which weren't in your show folder still get packaged correctly and can be opened. Well, that's the idea at any rate.
Yes, I had noticed the lost folder appeared once, so I get that was the case.
Suffering, I think. So look, I hope everyone got a lot out of that. Back into the regular Zoom session.